When I look back on it now, I sometimes wonder if the trouble started the very first day we set foot on that property. At the time, though, I was just a man proud of a hard-earned promotion, dragging his family halfway across the world to start what I thought was going to be the adventure of our lives. The year was 1984, and after years of grinding away at my company, I had finally been given the kind of job I had dreamed about. They told me I would be moving to Taipei, Taiwan, to take on a senior leadership position. For me, it was proof that all the long hours and late nights had meant something. It felt like I had finally made it. My wife Candace did not see it quite the same way. Where I saw opportunity, she saw risk and uncertainty. She was a practical woman, steady, protective of our girls. Stacy, our oldest, was 16, sharp as a tack, and not afraid to question everything. Marissa was 12, sweet and light-hearted, the kind of kid who always tried to see the best in any situation. To them, it was a leap into the unknown, but also a chance for excitement. The company rolled out the red carpet for us. They assigned a driver, a man named Achan, who knew the area well, and they set us up with housing that frankly blew me away. Back in the States, we were used to modest suburban living, so when that car pulled up to the gates of the mansion in the Yangming Mountains, I thought I had hit the jackpot. The drive up there had been strange enough. Long, curving roads that passed by rice paddies and overgrown cemeteries, old farmhouses that looked like they'd been abandoned for decades. Then finally, we reached it. Behind tall gates stood this enormous house with massive windows that caught the grey sky and threw it back at us like a mirror. To me, it looked impressive, a symbol of status. To my daughters, it looked like a palace. I still remember Marissa whispering, wide-eyed, "It's the biggest house I've ever seen." She ran her fingers along the stone pillars, her eyes practically glowing with excitement. She was already imagining herself swimming in the pool, racing through the endless rooms, and running barefoot through the garden. Stacy was less enthusiastic. She stood off to the side, her arms crossed, looking at the way the mist seemed to cling to the upper windows. Later, she told me the place felt heavy to her, like the mountain itself was pressing down on it. At the time, I dismissed it as teenage moodiness. Candace was unsettled from the moment we walked inside. She said the air felt colder in there, heavier, even though it was sweltering outside. She kept rubbing her arms, like she could not shake a chill. I laughed it off, tried to lighten the mood, but she did not laugh with me. And then, right there in the foyer, something happened that I could not explain, though I tried. Candace stumbled forward, nearly falling against one of the marble columns. I spun around, worried she had tripped, but the look on her face stopped me cold. She swore later that something shoved her, like an unseen hand had struck her square in the back. Our daughters reacted in their own ways. Marissa giggled nervously, thinking her mum was just clumsy, while Stacy's eyes went wide as saucers. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe she had just lost her balance, but Candace would not let it go. She knew what she felt. The company representative who had come along to show us the place carried on talking about how lucky we were to have such a prestigious home. He spoke of the amenities, the view, the status it would bring us. I nodded politely, but I noticed my wife was hardly listening. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her hand pressed against her back as though expecting to be shoved again. For the next 2 weeks, she begged me to consider another house. We looked at a few smaller places in crowded neighborhoods, but none compared to that mansion. The others felt cramped, ordinary, and to be honest, I could not shake the feeling that the company wanted me in that particular estate. It was part of the package, part of the statement of my new role. I told myself Candace would come around in time, that her unease was nothing more than nerves about moving to a foreign country. In the end, practicality won. With my career on the line, we moved in. Candace smiled for the girl's sake, but her eyes told me a different story, even as the moving boxes piled up and Marissa danced through the wide hallways. Candace carried herself like a woman who knew she had just crossed a line she could never uncross. At the time, I refused to see it. To me, it was just a house. But I would learn soon enough that it was far more than that. The first weeks in that mansion were a strange mix of awe and unease. On the surface, it was everything I had hoped for, a beautiful house with wide halls, tall ceilings, and a pool that shimmered in the humid air. Marissa was in heaven. She treated the place like a dream come true, swimming until her fingertips wrinkled, running barefoot across polished floors, her laughter echoing down the long corridors. But beneath that excitement, there was something else. Something I tried hard to ignore. Candace never settled in. Never. Every time she walked those halls, her eyes darted to the corners as though expecting to find someone standing there. She said the house pressed in on her, that the air itself felt wrong. I brushed it off at first, told her she was just homesick, that it was culture shock. But the truth is, I felt it too. I just would not admit it. One evening, while we were still unpacking, the jungle around us reminded us who was really in charge. Stacy let out a scream that shook the whole house. I raced up the stairs with Candace close behind, and we stopped dead in the doorway of her room. There, clinging to the wall near her bed, was a spider the size of my fist. Its thick black body twitched, and its long legs dragged slow and deliberate across the plaster. Marissa jumped onto a chair, shrieking, while Stacy stood frozen, her face pale with terror. I muttered a curse under my breath and looked around for something to kill it with, but Achan, our driver, came running in before I could act. He carried a shovel, of all things. Without hesitation, he swung hard, smashing the creature with one brutal strike. The body crumpled and a dark smear spread across the wall. I thought that was the end of it, but Achan's face told me otherwise. He stood there grim and quiet, and then he said something I will never forget. These spiders, they always come in pairs. If you see one, the other is close by. Candace shivered at his words. That night, she kept glancing at the dark corners of the ceiling, as though expecting another one to crawl out at any moment. She hardly slept, and truth be told, neither did I. And that was just the beginning. The rains came next. Taiwan in monsoon season is something you cannot really picture until you live through it. Sheets of water came down the mountainside, hammering the roof, sliding down the walls. And in that house, the water did not stay outside, it seeped in. We watched helplessly as streams of moisture ran down the interior walls like tears. Carpets grew damp, and in the bedrooms, water pooled along the baseboards. Candace fought it with towels, laying them down at the doors, but it felt like the house itself was trying to drown. I told myself it was bad construction, poor drainage, nothing more. But deep down, I could not shake the thought that the place was rejecting us. Then came the shocks. At first, they were small, little zaps from the light switches that made you flinch. But soon, the jolts grew sharper, strong enough to make Candace cry out in pain. She grew afraid to touch the switches at all, keeping lamps unplugged and sitting with the girls in the dark. What made it worse was the bills. Our power usage climbed higher and higher, far beyond what we were actually using. I accused the family of leaving things on, of wasting electricity, but they swore they were not. Arguments broke out, and Candace snapped at me that the house was draining us in more ways than one. I hated admitting it, but she was right. Still, I clung to reason. I told myself there was an explanation for everything, the water, the spiders, the shocks. I would not let myself believe otherwise, but Stacy was growing restless. One night she came to me pale as a ghost, swearing that she had heard footsteps in her room. She said they circled her bed in the dark, slow and deliberate, like someone was pacing just inches away. Candace, too, admitted in quiet moments that she had heard her name whispered in empty hallways or caught shadows flickering at the edge of her vision. She tried to tell me she was just tired, just under stress, but her eyes betrayed her fear, and I did what men like me do. I told myself it was all in their heads. I convinced myself that if I just worked harder, provided better, kept the house running, it would all go away. But in the silence of those humid nights, when the cicadas fell quiet and the jungle pressed against the walls, I would sometimes lie awake, staring at the ceiling. And in those moments, I could feel it too, something watching, something waiting. The house had opened its eyes. By the third week in that house, the strangeness stopped being little inconveniences and started feeling personal. The walls did not just drip with rainwater anymore. They seemed to hum with something I could not name. Candace told me in a whisper one night while the girls slept that she heard someone call her name when she was in the kitchen, not in a shout, but soft, drawn out, almost playful. She said she spun around expecting Marissa or Stacy, but the room had been empty. I told her it was her imagination, but her eyes were wet and wide, and I could tell she was not convinced by my excuses. The girls began noticing things too. Stacy claimed her bedroom door rattled at night, as though someone were jiggling the knob. Marissa, ever the cheerful one, admitted sheepishly that sometimes she heard laughter in the hallways, faint and high-pitched, like a child trying not to be caught. Then came the night Stacy told us about Thomas. She came to the dinner table pale as paper, picking at her food, barely speaking. Finally, she said there was a boy in the house. A boy named Thomas. My fork froze in my hand, and I looked at Candace, who looked back at me with alarm. Stacy explained that he appeared in her room late at night. He was around her age, she said, maybe a little older, dressed in clothes that looked out of place. Old-fashioned, she called them. He told her his name was Thomas and that he had once lived in the house. Candace nearly dropped her glass. She begged Stacy to stop, said it was just a dream, just teenage imagination. But Stacy swore on her life it was real. "He talks to me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He stands at the foot of my bed and asks me to play." Marissa laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, but there was no laughter in Stacy's eyes, and I, stubborn as always, told her it was a trick of the mind, nothing more. But then, only a few nights later, Candace saw something herself. She had gotten up in the middle of the night, restless from the heat. As she made her way down the hall, she stopped at the sound of tapping. At first, she thought it was rain against the window panes, but when she reached the living room, she froze. There, standing outside one of the massive windows, was a figure. She could see the outline of a boy pressed against the glass. His face was pale, his eyes wide and hollow, and though his lips did not move, she swore she heard a voice inside her head whispering her name. She let out a scream that jolted the whole family awake. By the time I rushed into the room, the window was empty, the glass slick with condensation. Candace was trembling, clutching her nightgown, pointing with a shaking finger. "He was right there," she cried. "Right there, Dennis!" I tried to calm her, pulling her into my arms, telling her it was a trick of the shadows, maybe even just her reflection distorted by the glass, but her body shook so hard I could feel her bones rattle. She was not mistaken. She knew what she saw. After that night, none of us slept the same way again. Stacy insisted Thomas was real. Marissa grew quiet, sticking close to her mother, no longer so eager to run through the halls. And Candace. Well, she seemed to age years in just a few days, her smile fading, her eyes darkening with worry. And me? I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. But every time I passed one of those tall windows and caught my reflection in the glass, I wondered if maybe someone else was looking back from the other side. It was sometime in the middle of that first month when the house finally showed its teeth. Candace had gone upstairs for a shower one evening. I was downstairs with the girls, half distracted by paperwork, trying to focus on anything but the unease that had been creeping in. I remember Stacy was thumbing through one of her books, and Marissa was sketching quietly, the kind of night that felt almost normal. Then out of nowhere, a scream tore through the house. It was Candace, and it was the kind of scream that stops your blood cold. I dropped everything and bolted up the stairs with the girls right behind me. When I threw open the bathroom door, I saw her standing there, dripping wet, clutching the towel tight to her chest, her eyes wild with terror. Steam rolled out behind her, but it was not the steam that rattled me. It was the look on her face. She swore that while she was showering, the water had turned icy, so cold it burned her skin. Then she said she felt hands, actual hands, grabbing at her shoulders, pressing down on her, holding her in place. She had tried to push them off, but nothing was there. When she finally managed to wrench free, the shower shut off by itself. The girls stared at her, wide-eyed and trembling. Marissa whispered, "Mom, was it Thomas?" I snapped at her, told her to stop, but the truth is, that same thought had crossed my mind. Candace sat on the edge of the bed afterward, wrapped in her robe, shivering as if she had been out in the snow. She looked at me with hollow eyes and said, "This house wants me gone, Dennis. It does not want us here." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but before I could, Stacy spoke up. Her voice was small, but steady. "Mom's right. At night, I hear someone calling me, not just whispering. It is louder now. It says my name over and over. It tells me to come outside." Marissa nodded, her face pale. She admitted she had heard it too, only the voice was softer with her, coaxing, sweet almost, like a friend trying to lead her by the hand. Candace pulled them both close, clutching their heads against her chest as if she could shield them with her own body. I wanted to dismiss it as childish imagination, but the fear in their voices was too real. That night, I barely slept. I kept pacing the halls, checking the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. And every time I stopped and listened, the silence felt alive. I would swear I heard faint footsteps above me when no one was upstairs, or the sound of breathing behind a closed door. Candace refused to be alone in that house anymore. If she showered, one of us had to be nearby. If she went into a room, she wanted a door left open. The girls began sleeping together in one room, their beds pushed close, a lamp left on between them. I told myself it was just stress, that we were all feeding off each other's nerves, but deep down, I felt it too, that pull in the dark, the sense that something unseen was reaching for my family, trying to draw them closer. And though I kept my mouth shut, I started to wonder if maybe Candace was right. Maybe the house did not want us, or worse. Maybe it did. After the shower incident, the house stopped pretending. Whatever had been playing games with us started showing itself more boldly. Candace was the one who bore the brunt of it. She moved through the mansion like a ghost herself, pale and withdrawn, her nerves stretched thin. Some mornings, I would find her staring at the far wall as if she was listening to something I could not hear. When I touched her shoulder, she would jump like I had struck her. One night, as I was closing the shutters against the rain, she whispered, "There is a man standing in the hallway." Her voice was flat, calm, almost like she had given up on being shocked. I spun around, but of course, there was nothing there. Just the empty corridor stretching on, shadows pooling in the corners. But her eyes followed something I could not see, tracing its movements slowly down the hall. That look on her face, it chilled me more than the emptiness itself. The girls were not spared either. Stacy admitted that she woke up one night to find a figure sitting at the foot of her bed. She said it was too dark to see clearly, but she could feel it watching her. Marissa started keeping her blanket pulled up over her head, whispering prayers she had memorized back in Sunday school. Then the noises grew louder. Footsteps in the night, doors slamming when no one was near them, windows rattling even when the air was still. The walls seemed to groan and creak as if the house itself was breathing. The worst moment for me came late one evening when I was alone in the living room. The girls were asleep and Candace was upstairs. I was sitting with a glass of whiskey, trying to unwind, when I caught a flicker of movement in the reflection of the big window. At first I thought it was my own reflection shifting, but then I realized the shape behind me was taller, thinner, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and though it stood perfectly still, I could feel it studying me. When I whipped around, the room was empty, but the whiskey glass in my hand trembled so badly I nearly dropped it. From that point on, I could not deny it anymore. Something was in that house with us. Candace's health spiraled. She stopped eating properly, grew weaker, and complained of constant headaches. She said the air felt heavy, pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her hands shook when she held her coffee cup, and her voice carried a thin, brittle edge, like it might crack at any moment. The girls were afraid to leave her side. Stacy clung to her mother's arm, while Marissa hovered close, her smile fading away day by day. Even Achan, who had always carried himself with quiet confidence, started crossing himself every time he entered the house. I tried to stay strong, to hold us together, but I could feel the weight of it too. The mansion had stopped being a home. It had become something else, a predator, patient and watchful, waiting for the moment to strike. And no matter how hard I tried to convince myself otherwise, I knew we were in over our heads. The storm rolled in without warning, like the sky had been holding its breath and suddenly let loose. The rain hammered the roof, and thunder rattled the windows so hard I thought the glass might shatter. I had lived through plenty of storms before, but this one felt different, meaner somehow, like it had a purpose. We were all gathered in the living room, the girls wrapped in blankets, Candace sitting stiff in her chair. The house groaned with every gust of wind, and every time lightning flashed, the long corridors lit up like the bones of some giant creature. Then the lights started acting strange. They flickered once, then steadied, then began to pulse, bright, dim, bright again, like a heartbeat. I went to check the breaker box, but before I could make it down the hall, every light in the house surged at once, glowing so hot the bulbs buzzed and hummed. The girls screamed, covering their eyes from the blinding white. And then, just as sudden as it came, the power dropped out completely. We were left in pitch darkness, with only the sound of the storm pounding outside. Candace's voice came through the dark, sharp and panicked. "It is the house. It does not want us to leave." I tried to calm her, fumbling for the flashlight I kept in the drawer. When I clicked it on, the beam caught their faces, all pale and wide-eyed, like they had just seen the end of the world. Then something happened that I will never forget. The television in the corner, even with the power gone, crackled to life. Static filled the screen, the kind that hisses like 1,000 whispers at once. The remote sat untouched on the table, but the volume climbed on its own until the room was filled with that deafening noise. And in the middle of the static, I could swear I heard voices, low, layered, speaking words I could not quite make out. Marissa buried her face in Candace's lap. Stacy clutched my arm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. I yanked the plug out of the wall, and the television died instantly. But the silence that followed was worse than the static. It pressed against my ears, heavy and expectant, like the whole house was holding itself still, waiting for us to make the next move. That was when I realized Candace had been right all along. This was not some old mansion creaking under its own weight. It was alive, and it was watching us, and deep down I feared it was not just watching. It was plotting. After that storm, something in Candace shifted for good. It was like the house had reached into her chest and snuffed out whatever light she had left. She stopped sleeping through the night. I would wake to find her pacing in the hallway, whispering to herself, her robe dragging behind her on the floor. Sometimes she would just stand at a window for hours, staring out into the rain, her lips moving as if answering some voice only she could hear. The girls grew more restless too. Stacy told me that Thomas came to her again. This time, not at the foot of her bed, but beside her, close enough to touch. She said his eyes were dark, almost empty, and he told her she did not belong with us anymore, that she should come with him instead. That same week, Marissa nearly vanished. It was late, close to midnight, when I woke to the sound of the front door creaking. At first I thought the wind had forced it open, but when I rushed downstairs I saw Marissa standing there in her nightgown, her hand already on the latch. Her eyes were glassy, half asleep, like she was walking in a dream. "Marissa," I shouted, grabbing her by the shoulders. She blinked up at me, confused, and said softly, "They were calling me, Daddy. They said it was safe outside. They told me Mama would be happy if I went." Candace came running down behind me, crying, as she scooped Marissa up. She held her so tightly I thought she might crush the poor girl. I wanted to scream at Candace for putting this nonsense in their heads, but I knew deep down she had not put it there. The voices were real. They were pulling at my children, whispering sweet lies, trying to lead them into the dark. Candace was falling apart before my eyes. Her skin grew pale, her eyes sunk deep into her face, and her hands shook constantly. She would burst into tears over nothing, clutching the girls like she was afraid they might disappear the moment she let go. One night she looked at me with a hollow expression and said, "Dennis, the house wants them, not us, them. It is feeding on their innocence." I told her she was losing her grip, but in truth, I feared she was right. The walls seemed to lean in on us more each day, the air thick and suffocating. Doors opened by themselves, shadows darted across the hallways, and sometimes the mirrors showed things that were not there, a second figure standing just behind you, gone when you turned around. I wanted to believe I was still in control, that I could protect my family with logic and locks and light. But with every passing night, the mansion reminded me how powerless I really was. Candace was slipping away. The girls were in danger, and I was running out of time to stop whatever this thing was. It was one of the darkest nights I've ever lived through. Candace had spent the evening trying to calm the girls, but by 10 o'clock, she was shaking so badly I had to guide her to sit on the sofa. Her hands were trembling, her eyes wild, and every breath seemed to hurt her. The house, it seemed, sensed her weakness. A sudden bang upstairs made us all jump. The chandelier in the entryway rattled like it might crash at any second. Then the lights flickered violently before going out completely. We were plunged into a darkness so complete it felt solid. I grabbed a flashlight, but even its beam seemed swallowed by the house. Candace was whimpering now, holding the girls close. I told myself to stay calm, that we had faced storms before, that this was just the house acting up. But deep down, I knew it was not. A low, hollow rumble echoed through the halls, like the building itself was groaning in anger. Then came the sound of steps, heavy, deliberate, pacing back and forth above us. But there was no one upstairs, not a soul. Marissa cried softly, hiding her face against Candace's chest. Stacy clutched my arm so hard I could feel her nails digging in, and then the cold came. A freezing wind swept down the hall, even though all the windows were closed. The hair on my arms stood on end. Candace whispered, barely audible, "They're here. They're inside." I don't remember much after that. Things started happening so fast. Doors slammed themselves with enough force to shake the walls. A picture frame fell off the wall on its own. Curtains whipped around the room, as though someone invisible had run through. And worst of all, the girls screamed as if someone, or something, was touching them. I tried to reach for them, but the air itself seemed to push me back, thick and heavy. Candace was shouting, a sound of pure terror, calling the names of her daughters. I shouted too, pounding the walls, but it felt like shouting into a vacuum. I realized then that this was not just a haunting, this was a trap. The house was alive and it was feeding off our fear. Candace collapsed into my arms. Her body shook uncontrollably. "We won't survive this," she whispered, her voice breaking. I held her tighter, trying to keep some semblance of control. but I felt the house pressing in on all sides, the shadows moving, almost alive, whispering and scratching at the edges of our minds. It was clear we were outmatched. We could not fight it, we could not reason with it, and we could not stay. If we did not find help, I knew the mansion might claim us all. We were desperate by the time Bob Patton connected us with the priest. Candace and I had reached the point where we could no longer function as a family. The girls were terrified, and our nights were spent huddled together, praying we would survive until morning. The priest arrived quietly, an elderly man in simple robes. He carried bundles of incense, joss paper folded into stacks of money, and baskets of fruit. There was a calmness about him, but I could see the weight of what he had come to face in the set of his jaw and the intensity in his eyes. He did not speak much at first, only walking slowly through each room. Every now and then he paused, closed his eyes, and moved his hands in patterns I did not recognize. Candace and I followed silently, hearts pounding, waiting for him to tell us what he saw. Finally, he turned to us. Through Bob's translation, he said the words that made my stomach drop. "This house is dangerous. It is feeding the dead, not the living. 2 spirits abound here, and they are hungry." Candace gasped. I thought immediately of the figure Thomas had seen in the upstairs window. The priest continued, "They cannot move on. They are tethered to this place, and they feed on fear, on life itself. Your daughters are their target." He instructed us to prepare for the ritual. Every window and door had to be opened. The spirits needed a way out, he explained. Candace and I worked together, pulling open shutters and unlatching windows, the house groaning and creaking as if resisting every move. The priest lit the incense, and smoke swirled through the halls. His chants began, low and rhythmic, filling the mansion with a sound that was both terrifying and strangely comforting. Almost immediately, the house reacted. Lights flickered violently, doors slammed shut, shadows moved across the walls, twisting unnaturally. The air pressed against us like a solid weight, and I could feel something brushing against my legs, unseen but heavy. The priest remained calm, methodically moving from room to room. Every time he sprinkled holy water or set down an offering, the lights would stabilize briefly. The air would lighten, only for the darkness to surge again moments later. When it came time for Stacy to take the offerings to the spot where the original owners had died, she froze at the edge of the yard. The priest's eyes held hers, and he told her firmly, "You must. They will follow, but they must be fed." Candace squeezed her hand. I nodded. Trembling, Stacy carried the basket into the darkness. Each step felt watched, the air thick with presence, and I feared she might collapse before she could finish. But when she placed the offerings on the ground and whispered for the spirits to take them and leave us in peace, the wind stilled. The shadows lifted slightly. For the first time in months, there was a quiet that felt almost safe. The priest completed the ritual, moving room by room, chanting, sprinkling holy water, and burning the joss paper. When he finished, he placed a mirror etched with symbols above the front door. "This will protect you, but only temporarily," he said. 2 or 3 months, perhaps. After that, they will return. You must leave or face tragedy." For the first time, Candace and I allowed ourselves to breathe. The house was calm. The air no longer pressed against our lungs. The oppressive darkness had lifted, at least for now. We had survived the ritual, but we both knew it was borrowed time. The house had not forgotten us. When June finally came, we were ready to leave. Candace had marked the calendar every day, counting down to the end of school, the end of the nightmare. Stacy's relief was palpable, and even Marissa seemed lighter, as if the fear that had clung to her for months was finally loosening. We packed slowly, carefully, taking nothing we could not carry. The mansion had become a trap, a place where every shadow and every sound reminded us we were not welcome. Candace lingered at the front door, staring at the mirror the priest had installed, knowing it was holding the peace for just a short while. As we drove away, the jungle stretched out behind us, humid and silent. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw a figure in the upstairs window, just as Thomas had described, the silhouette of a woman, her face hidden in shadow. I blinked, and she was gone. Back in the United States, we tried to rebuild normalcy. Candace, Stacy, and Marissa carried the memories of that mansion with them, the whispers, the footsteps, and the invisible pressure of the house that had threatened to tear our family apart. Over the years, I learned that the haunted mansion was more than a story. It was a reminder of forces we cannot always understand. Candace eventually moved on, living quietly away from the chaos of that valley. Stacy and Marissa grew up, carrying the lessons of fear and survival in a world that often felt too ordinary afterward. I myself remarried and continued my career abroad, careful to avoid any place that felt too quiet or too perfect. I knew now that some houses carry history in their walls, history that does not forgive or forget. Even now, when I think of Taiwan, of the Yangming Mountains, and the burned pig farm that gave birth to restless spirits, I feel a chill. The hungry ghosts do not vanish, they wait, patient, tethered to the land where they perished. We were lucky, we survived. But luck is temporary, and I know in the quiet hours of the night that somewhere in that mansion the shadows still linger and the hungry ghosts still hunger. Our story, terrifying as it was, became a lesson. Some doors are not meant to be opened, some houses are not meant to be lived in, and some spirits cannot be reasoned with. We left Taiwan with only memories, scarred but alive. And every time I hear of Ghost Month, lanterns glowing in the humid night, I remember the lesson we learned the hard way. The dead do not always rest, and sometimes they are closer than you think.